Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and as you're listening to this, I'll be sitting on a beach in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. If you're wondering where that is, well, that's the spot that Joe Biden fell off his bicycle. We do a family reunion there every year, and I really need it this year. As you know, the past couple of years have been really shitty for me and my family. I should be grateful that things aren't worse, but really, they can't be that much worse, and I'm not that grateful. I feel like a victim who just has shit happening to them, and I'm not even the person who's sick. Fuck, all of this sucks really bad, and that's why I really need a beach vacation. And a beach vacation is the last thing my guest this week, Luke Edgar, would do. Well, maybe he'd do the beach if there was good surf and about 50 other adventures nearby, because if you heard part 1 of my podcast with Luke, you'll know that Luke's an adventurer who gets after it all the time. There is no rest for this man. And on the podcast, we dive balls deep back into Festical, the many brands that Luke worked for, and he has good stories for each one of them. Before I get into it, I want to thank you for listening and ask you to tell a friend about the show. It really does help things grow. See, I'm not a pro athlete building a podcast off my name and athletic talents. I'm a pro on the mic, and I deliver the best interview show in snow. I put in the research to dive deep and get you the stories that you want to hear from the athletes and personalities in the industry who really matter. I've been going for 400 consecutive weeks. I do it to provide the best entertainment for you, and while I'm doing that, I only ask that you tell friends about the show and that you share my social posts and review me wherever you listen, so I can keep growing and keep doing this podcast. Honestly, the last thing I want to do is to have to get a real job again. And the best way to keep me from doing that is to support my amazing sponsors who make the podcast happen. They are Elon Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Outdoor Research, Stanley, Best Day Brewing, and Liquid Force. Now, it's time for part 2 with Luke Edgar. We left off talking about Festical. That event was built around the specialty retailer, and it was about building relationships with them and winning there, which has pretty much been your playbook over the years. And can you tell us the meaning behind the name of Festical? Because I think that has like 3 different parts.
Yeah, I was up with Lance Miller and some other guys thinking about this event. We'd been dreaming about it for a while. I'd been to Burning Man, so I was like, I wanted to incorporate some Burning Man into it. I wanted it to be an event where our dealers and our family and our friends came and hung out with us at Mount Baker. And we were like, we need a good name. And we were up at Island Lake, or no, we were up at Valhalla Mountain Touring. There's a lot of Valhallas up there in BC, but this one was just you snowcat in and then you start skinning from there. And we were up there for like 5 days, and we were shitting around one night, just brainstorming. And we were like, okay, it's a festival. And we were laughing at the Seinfeld Festivus. And we're like, okay, what can our name be? And we came up with Festical. The meaning behind it was 1/3 festival, 1/3 spectacle, 2/3 testicle. And that's why we were like, we got to make sure there's girls at this event, or else the guys are going to be really bummed and it's not going to be as fun of an event. And there'll probably be more drinking and fighting than there will be having fun. So that's how we kind of came up with the name, was that. And then we came up with a whole bunch of taglines for stickers for it. You know, I came and Mount Baker swallowed, a bunch of other ones. We just had a whole bunch of fun stickers that we handed out and swag and stuff. So it was a pretty epic event the 2 years we did it. And those people that are listening that went there will know there's really never been anything since then. I know K2 did it a few years after I left and changed the name to something else. I think Festival might have been too edgy for them. I don't know. You were there. You can tell me.
I think Festical was your item that we didn't want to take and make our own. We wanted to create something different because Festival is something that lives in infamy that I don't think could ever be recreated, given it was recreated in a different fashion. But Festival was a legendary type deal there. And what Festival did was it built that community, it built those relationships, and that translated into more business down the road. And that was all part of the master plan. And business is what the K2 Corporation was all about, given it was a lot looser back then. But what was the hardest part of corporate snowboarding behind the scenes for you?
I think the hardest part was dealing with people that went to college and were very smart, but just may not had a street smart or retail smarts. And They didn't spend time in retail or as a sales rep. That was the hardest part. But at the same time, the team of people we had at K2 Snowboards all through the 90s, that was like our secret sauce. I mean, we definitely had a headwind being a ski brand trying to do snowboards, but we had this awesome team with Brent and Haley and Dave and Heidi and our team managers, Kevin and Blue. And, we just had a magical team that really stayed together, including our sales team that stayed together for a long time. And to me, the death of it all, when it was time for me to leave, was just every year, the last few years, we'd come up with a budget and a plan, and then we'd get our budget cut because inline skates was tanking and they were sitting on a warehouse full of inline skates. And I really liked the people that were doing the inline skates. There's a couple people there, Amy and another guy. I can't remember his name.
Dean Burke, Fergus. There's a lot of people. Bogue.
Yeah, a couple good guys that were good guys, but man, it was just tough having another division suck the budget and wind out of your sales every single year. And I'd been there 10 years, so it was kind of time for me to hang up my K2 shoes, even though, like I said, I will always have a big piece of my heart carved out with a big K2 on it.
Well, what's interesting is you were there to see the anomaly that inline skate was when it came into the building and took over, because I think you're talking about at the tail end when maybe some bad business decisions were made. But there was a while when I feel like inline skates carried the company based on the millions of units that they went from 0 to millions like in a couple of years, which is crazy. And what was to be learned from that business overall when you look back at it all? Because it was like a rocket ship, which you've been on a bunch of rocket ships, but it crashed really hard.
Great question. It was a tough one. Like we had our own problems to deal with too, because we were getting like these inline skate designers developing our snowboard boots for the Clicker, and Clicker really blew up the K2 brand in the mid 90s and helped us open up a lot of the best retail doors that we could. When we grew very quickly, same kind of on that same trajectory, maybe not at the same scale, but the same trajectory as the inline skates did a few years later. And when that crashed, again, it was self-inflicted due to just poor boot design year after year, to where dealers just couldn't take a risk with our, what are you going to deliver this year? Because we were like, we'd have one good year and two bad years and one good year and two bad years. So after a while, that kind of crushed that program, and we had to kind of take a step back and pull our bootstraps up and figure out how to get back into it. And at the same time, strap bindings were getting better. There was baseless bindings that were coming out. There was, just better technology in the ratchets and better durability and reliability. And so there was definitely a shift going back to strap bindings and away from step-in bindings. And now that I've been riding the Burton step-ons for the last 2 years, I got to tell you, those things are badass. That's the greatest contribution to snowboarding Burton's ever done.
I mean, I hear great things about that binding, and you guys were doing some amazing things back then. And when you mentioned it in the last podcast that everyone who worked at K2 thought that time was special, and it was the Vachon era that I really feel like was a really special time. And when you think about that, like the specialness for you is the people, the trips, the travel, the products, all the different things. But at the end of the day, a lot of it has to do with snowboarding. And how many days were you able to ride a year just based on K2's time?
When you look at people in the ski and snowboard industry, they have a real passion for the sport and they end up working in the industry. And you probably can relate to this. And you kind of end up spending a lot of time at trade shows, a lot of time indoors, a lot of time talking about skiing and snowboarding, and not as much time actually on snow doing it. You tend to go to a lot of on snow demos. You got SIA, and then you got the buying group shows before SIA. So there was a lot of time spent talking about it and not as much time on snow. And then in the spring is when, and being in the Northwest where K2 was based out of, in the spring was when we really could extend our season. And that's when we were always trying to figure out, like, okay, how can we get dealers to come out here in April? And, oh man, can we get dealers to come out to climb halfway up Mount Rainier and do the Interglacier with us in June? Because we were still snowboarding in April and May and June. You just tend to keep going higher and higher up on the volcanoes as the snow level and the freeze level goes higher and higher. You tend to follow that until, about the third week of June is when typically you kind of hang up your boots, which is what I did this year as well.
And thinking of other travel with K2, because yes, there is a ton of standing around, there's a ton of desk jockey work, and that part of it sucks. And it does suck a lot of the passion out of somebody who wants to be out in the mountains when they're stuck at the desk. But were you able to be in like Alaska for those pioneering days with the farmers and the Paradas of the world? Did you make sure that you were on those trips, or were you stuck selling?
Well, you're right. When I think back on it, I always think about all the time indoors. But yeah, there were a ton of trips to great ski areas all over North America. And then when the Alaska heli skiing thing started, I got to go up to St. Lodge pretty early in the probably 92, I want to say. And I remember going up there. My first year was just on my own dime. And then I got asked to be a judge, and I can talk to you a little bit more about that. And I went up 2 more times. But that first year in Valdez was really, really epic. I remember getting up there, and there's a bunch of industry pros and whatnot. And my first heli ride, I'm on the heli with Steve Clausen. I want to say the heli back then was $35 a ride.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I know. Like when you think about a heli day today, it's what, $1,500 a day. That back then it was very affordable. And so we got dropped off by Chet up on the top of my very first run, and I could see the line I wanted to do. But there was cliffs on one side and ice fall on the other, but there was a couloir right in the middle, and it's real easy to see, but it's a 55-degree slope or 50-degree slope that goes down almost 5,000 vert till it transitions out onto the glacier and mellows out and then brings you down to the road. So my very first run, Clausen goes, well, you just got here and you came the furthest, so you get to go first. And I'm like, oh shit, I got to man up. And when you're standing on the top and you're looking out, you can't see your line. All you see is the valley floor, a mile below you. And you're like, holy shit, that's a cliff I'm going off of. I hope I find the right line. So I drop into this couloir and I find it. I'm like, okay, good. I go down about halfway and I go, I wonder if I'm supposed to go all the way. We didn't have radios. We didn't have guides. No one told me. I'm like, I wonder if I should wait for those guys or should I just take it? So I pull off on one of the sides and I kind of tuck in on my toe side edge, and it's steep, right? I'm hanging on. And those guys are waiting for me to pop out on the bottom. And they're like, what's he doing? Like, did he fall? And so then Clausen comes off the top of this cornice up into the couloir and breaks off a Volkswagen bus of the cornice, and it goes flying down the mountain. He kind of pulls off to the side, and then he starts snowboarding behind it. It's going in front of him, and it's coming down like 100 miles an hour, 25 feet to the right of me. And I'm like, holy shit. And as soon as that thing went by, I said, screw that. And I took off. So then I'm going down this run as fast as I can because I don't want to get caught by Clausen slough. And I get to the Bergschrund. It's a big crack where the end of the snowfield ends and the glacier starts.
Yep.
Like a crevasse. And this thing is like, in some spots it's 5 feet wide, some spots it's 20 feet wide. I jump the widest spot and somehow I stick the other side landing. And underneath me, while I'm in the air, all I see is just blue death ice that goes down thousands of feet to the core of the earth. And I make the other side and I come out into the flat zone where we're all going to regroup. And then Clausen comes up. He goes, what'd you do? How come you were waiting? I'm like, I didn't know. We didn't talk about it. Like, I just didn't know what I should do. It's my first run in Alaska. So that was a very memorable run. And I was very lucky to get to judge Clausen in, I think, 3 extreme snowboard contests, or maybe 4.
That's incredible. And you were on the top of the pyramid of a dream job with K2. It's a cool, fun company. You're running the snowboard category. And then you're at Atomic. And do you go on your own? Do you get courted by Atomic? Or why leave such a good thing with K2? I mean, you mentioned the whole skate thing, but was that the deal? Was just like budgets were being cut and you were sick of the corporate structure and you had to go? And you went to a Euro ski brand that wasn't cool?
Yeah, there was just a lot of politics happening. And, seeing something that you really were a part of from day one, and then you build it up and you make it into what was the number 2 snowboard brand for the last 6 years I was there. And I just saw a lot of other influences that weren't even snowboarders that were influencing the direction of our brand and our products. And it just got really frustrating. It really did. And, when I was young in my career and, 10 years into it, and I'm like, all right, I got to go do something else. And it was tough because I love Seattle. I loved living in West Seattle. My kids were born there, had a lot of friends at K2 at the time in my world there. And then next thing I know, I'm moving my family across the country to outside of Amherst, New Hampshire, to where Atomic was based out of. When I look back at that, I want to say that Atomic, even though it was way smaller, way, way, way smaller, but there was 2 guys, Herbie and Reini, in Austria that were my counterparts. And they were just amazing humans, still friends to this day. Actually, Herbert is actually the head of all ski and snowboard product development at Atomic, and just a kick-ass human. So I got to work with those guys, and I got to go to Austria like 4 times a year, and I really wanted that international experience. And so I was traveling back and forth there, doing a bunch of different trips. I did dealer trips to Austria where I took American dealers there. And oh man, the mayhem we did there, that was insane. Like 6 rental cars where all of them had some sort of damage. I don't know how that happened, but a week in Austria is so fun in the spring.
So you're in charge of like everything snowboard for the most part, because Atomic had dabbled in snowboard for like a decade, but none of their shit was really cool. At least it didn't hit in the States at all. And while product is king, snowboarding is also a graphics game. So the Atomic stuff is looking stale. And then when you get in there, do you realize that, hey, this is a graphics game first and foremost, and the first hurdle we need to do is make our graphics go from like lame to holy shit, that's an Atomic?
Yeah, we had good product in terms of how it performed.
Sure.
But the graphics were definitely they just didn't have a real identity. And so the first thing I did was start to interview designers on the West Coast because that's where the trends happened. And I found Scott Holgren from The Angry Swede in San Diego. And Scott worked with me the whole 4.5 years I was at Atomic. And we did focus groups with dealers where we go to cool areas and show them kind of what we're doing, have them give us feedback. We had a lot of really good feedback. And I think that was a big thing. I mean, I wouldn't say Atomic set the world on fire. I don't even think they make snowboards anymore. But we had good product, we had good graphics. And the thing that kind of got us going was we had a inexpensive but really good riding board with a super sick graphic that Scott did. That was like a skull with like horns coming off. It was like just, typical Scott Holgren stuff, but really cool graphic. And so I had like a budget. I could give away free snowboards to people or I could subsidize snowboards. And so my plan was to do $100 Proform snowboard, for like a rail board, like a backup board, like for $100. This is like a really good riding board. And a lot of the shop employees that bought that $100 board ended up making that their primary board and just loved how it rode. And that really helped drive sell-through and get us more placement in those stores because these guys really liked it. And I think I kind of pissed off a few of my competitor buddies because they were all like, shit, now we got to do $100 boards. But it took my $10,000 promo budget and stretched it way further than if I would have just given everybody free stuff. And a lot of times when you give people free stuff, they don't necessarily appreciate it as much. They're like, yeah, I'll take a free snowboard. And then do they ride it? I don't know. And so you really want to make sure people are invested in it. By them buying it for $100, you knew that they were committed to riding it.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start things out with Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. While Peter Glenn has been the place to get all of your ski and snowboard needs for over 60 years, they do so much more than that. If you're an inline skater, they have the best products from K2 and Rollerblade. If you like to wakeboard, surf, skate, or whatever, Peter Glenn has you covered with the best gear from Liquid Force and others. And if you just need the most comfortable shoes on the planet, Peter Glenn has all of the best from Hoka and On. No matter what your summer or winter needs are, Peter Glenn has you covered. And if you can't shop in store, head on over to peterglennsports.com, where you'll find all the brands at the best prices, free shipping on orders of over $50, and you'll have the comfort of knowing that returns are hassle-free with Peter Glenn. So please support the show and buy your gear from the best, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Next up, it's Liquid Force, a brand that's been supplying premium wake gear since 1995, and it's not just wakeboards these days. Think the best park, boat, surf, and foil boards, built with state-of-the-art materials and technology to make your day on the water easier, better, and more fun than ever before. From wakeboards to shapers to vests to handles to foils to surfers, whether you're a seasoned pro or just dipping your toes in, Liquid Force has you covered with gear that's not just equipment, it's a lifestyle. And if you want to live that lifestyle, I have a one-time purchase code for you to use on the Liquid Force website. I'm going to save you 15% on your entire purchase. All you need to do is head on over to liquidforce.com, go shopping. After you pick out your brand new TC Skim Wake Surfer or whatever you buy, enter the code POWELL15, that's all capital letters and numbers, no spaces at checkout, and you'll get that deal. My final sponsor this round is Outdoor Research. I've loved OR for a long time because they make the best, most waterproof, warmest outerwear in the world, and that's because it's engineered and tested right here in the miserable conditions that the Pacific Northwest can deliver. And there are so many more reasons to be into the brand. While everyone knows they make the best lightweight hiking pants ever built, their new line of high-performance mountain biking apparel has been getting rave reviews from bike media, and when I recently chatted with OR's newly minted X Games gold medalist Tom Van Steenbergen and his brother Bass, they couldn't stop talking about how they've never had better gear. And that's what I think every time I get an OR package. Wow, they really thought about every detail to make this work better for me. To make your gear work better for you, head on over to outdoorresearch.com and check out the brand new Freewheel collection and everything else on the OR site. They cut no corners and they have the best in style and function on the planet. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. When you're the subsidiary here in the US and you're trying to grow this brand here and it's like a purely uphill battle for you, I mean, if you grow sales 5 to 10% in a year, is that like a huge win to the Euros where they're like, Luke is a genius and it's really easy for you to kind of stick to your playbook, own the dealer, and you're going to see that incremental growth with your brand. And you know you can do that with any brand, let alone Atomic. And you just have to grow a little every year to keep them stoked.
Yeah, like I was the one that ended up resigning from them. I got headhunted out to Utah, and I'd kind of been in New Hampshire for 4.5 years. So we were making progress and doing some good things. I wasn't worried about job security or anything like that. I just really missed the West Coast. And all of my family, my wife's family lives in Seattle. And they all came and visited us out in New Hampshire once in the 4.5 years we were there. But it was expensive to get there, and it took a whole day to get there and a whole day to get back from Seattle to New Hampshire. So we really missed our family, and I missed the big mountains. And I enjoyed riding the mountains of the East Coast. And I did a ton of Tuckerman's trips, both at K2. I did a bunch of dealer trips at Tuckerman's. And then I did a bunch of individual trips up there when I was living there. So I really like Tuckerman's in the spring, but it's a short window. I guess if you go there in the middle of the winter, it's fun, but I never did. I always went there in the spring, and it seemed like a short window for when the snow was good, and then it would kind of die.
So the next thing for you was Ogio, but I thought you did that in New Hampshire for some reason. I think I was looking at your LinkedIn. But did Ogio get you to move out west, or did you do that remote from New Hampshire?
Yeah, Ogio recruited me. I really liked the product. I liked the guy that I was going to report to. And it was in Salt Lake. And I honestly had never thought about living in Utah. If I was to be in Seattle and get recruited by a Utah brand, I'd be like, I don't know if I want to live in Utah year round. I'd like it in the winter, but I don't know if I'd like it in the summer. And then I came out here and checked it out, and I went, this is doable. It's a 12-hour drive to Seattle. I can be anywhere on the West Coast, by car in 12 to 14 hours. It's a good central location to commute from in terms of flying domestically or internationally. And so I started thinking about it, and I came back, talked to my wife, and we ended up taking that job and moving out here. Right when I started, I was there for about 3 months. I put together a 3 to 5 year business plan about how Ogio could compete with Dakine. They were doing some really good things in the motocross world. They were doing some stuff in golf. They had a snowboard bag and some other travel bags. They didn't really do anything that was bad, and the quality of the product was good. But when I got there, I just realized the culture wasn't a good fit for me. It was a tough one. Like, you couldn't wear shorts to work. I'm like, what? We're supposed to be like a lifestyle action sports brand. You can't wear shorts and it's 105 degrees outside
Yeah.
in the summertime. And I mean, that was a red flag. And there was definitely some other red flags, but I put together that business plan, and my boss and the president and the CEO, nobody showed up to the meeting. My wife calls me like 3 hours later and says, "Hey, how'd your meeting go?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I'm still in the meeting room waiting for somebody to show up. I brought my laptop, so I'm just been working from here." And nobody came in to even talk about the plan. So I'm like, all right, I just bought a house in Park City. I just moved my family to Utah. This is not a good fit for me. And I got to figure out what I'm going to do next. So I lasted there about a year, maybe 14 months. And then Quicksilver bought Rossignol. And when they were setting up the mountain center here in Park City, I'm like, ooh, I got to figure out how to get a job there. And it turned out the guy that was running the mountain center is Francois Goulet, who still runs Rossignol. He is my neighbor, lives like 3 houses up the street from me, and still a good friend. And so I ended up meeting him, and he's like looking at my address going, I think the person that's applying lives right across the street. That's what he told his wife. And so I went and interviewed with him and got that job. And that was a fun little window of working with Quicksilver for that 2 years. But at the tail end of that was when Quicksilver struggled with the whole surf industry of clothing, just got decimated. Billabong, Quicksilver, all the brands. And they all took a tank, and it was a big hit to them. So I knew that there was going to be some layoffs coming, and I'd been recruited by Skullcandy, by Rick at Skullcandy, and turned him down 2 times before. And I kept holding up my key ring saying, Rick, look at all these keys. That's like a car payment. That's a house payment. I don't know anything about consumer electronics. Why do you want me to come work at Skullcandy? And they were still in that very early startup phase. And I really messed up by not going there earlier because I would have had more stock options and made more money. But the time was right when I went there. I was employee 23, and I literally packed up my box at the Mountain Center on a Friday and walked across the street and dropped it off at my new desk, and then started on Monday and right across the street from the old place I worked at. So that was kind of an interesting transition, a weekend of thinking about my new job. And I still remember my first $1 million month at Skullcandy and how excited I was to break $1 million in revenue in 1 month.
Well, you did way more than that, but you've gotten way ahead of ourselves. We've gotten a little bit ahead of ourselves, and that's not your style. You usually stay in the moment and tell me a great story here and there. But I'm going to take it back to Rossignol, and when you're with that group, I mean, you're in a big stable of brands again, and you're hired on to be the VP of Sales for Rossignol, GNU, Libtech, Bent Metal. You're introducing DC into snow, I think. And you relocate to the Mountain Center, so it seems to be another dream job. I didn't realize that Skullcandy was right across the street. But when I think about both of those companies, I mean, with Skullcandy, you're in one major product category that has a bunch of ancillary product categories to it. With Rossignol, you're managing a bunch of different brands. Does it get to the point at Rossi where you're doing so many jobs that you're way too busy for your own good and you can't really even go up the mountain, which is right next door to you? And then you get to Skullcandy and you can actually excel at your job and ride?
Well, a lot of what you just said isn't 100% true.
Sure, I'm just making assumptions.
So I worked at the Mountain Center, and there were a lot of brands incorporated in there. But like Meryvn was still definitely run by Pete and Mike and Greg Hughes, their sales manager. And so that team was still doing their thing. And then we collaborated where we could and did different trips together and working on different things. Bob McKnight had a different vision of what he wanted to do with Meryvn, but it was always a Northwest brand. It was always Pete and Mike's brand, even when Quicksilver bought it. And obviously they've done great things with it over the years. And where I helped out was Rossignol Snowboards, which was really a tough one. Talk about pushing a rock up a hill. That was a tough one. I mean, they make great skis. It just was, their big focus was rental snowboards. And it's hard to be a retail brand when you've got all these rubber bumper snowboards out there with big Rossignol on it all over the mountain. No one's going to want to ride that brand. So it was a tough one. But actually, we had some great people that worked with us, Fran Stoll and Alex Pashley and a bunch of people at the Mountain Center that were part of this team. And then we hired a girl to run Roxy Snowboards, Kira, and she was awesome and still is. So we had a lot of support there for the women that were running Roxy, but we let them make the decisions. And then I was helping just more on a consulting basis with DC when they were getting into snowboards. And so I got to go over to Europe with Bob and some of the other guys from DC to kind of work on the factories and figure out where they wanted to build their snowboards and where the synergies would be behind the scenes. And then obviously they would take the full graphics and the shapes with their team riders and all that stuff that they wanted to kind of come up with and take that. I wouldn't say it was a well-oiled machine on who did what, because DC was obviously doing really well with shoes and their snowboard boots. And then they wanted to get into snowboards. Roxy was an easy no-brainer kind of in terms of making a brand that was for women by women and building out that team and letting those guys go down their road. And Meryvn was always Meryvn. I mean, I don't know if Meryvn changed a bit before Quicksilver or after Quicksilver. They were kind of just always their same self. And I think at the same time, Bob loved it because they were so passionate and authentic about it, you know, about their brand and how they go to market. And that's a whole nother movie and story.
So in that building, though, it sounds like there was like 7 different VPs under one roof. And it reminds me of the old silo business at K2. And when you think about it, which was more corporate? Was it that Quicksilver time or the K2 time?
I guess it was probably the Quicksilver time because I did have to work a lot with Rossignol. And I've worked with a lot of Germans, a lot of French, and a lot of Austrians. And I got to tell you, the Austrians are the best and the French are the hardest to work with because if it's not their idea, it's a bad idea. And it's funny, the Meryvn team and myself and Francois and a bunch of us were over in Barcelona meeting with the Rossignol marketing team from France. And they were going to change their Pure Mountain Company tagline, which is an awesome fucking tagline for a mountain brand.
Yeah.
And they were going to change their Pure Mountain Company tagline to "Now we are," the letter R. So the first time I saw that, I'm like, oh no, that's not going to work. And I tell him Francois that, and he goes, well, you got to tell Bernard Meryvn, who was the CEO at the time of Quicksilver. So I'm in a meeting with Bernard. I go, well, I hope I'm not like one of those guys that's, all right, you're not on the bus, get off the bus, you're out of here. Like if you don't like our ideas, get out of here. But I had to tell him that, like, I just don't see that working in the US market. And so I told Bernard that, and he goes, well, we're going over next week or whatever with the Meryvn guys. Let's have the presentation, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. So I bit my tongue. They do the presentation, they show the video, and it ends with this deep voice going, now we are, or now you are, whatever it was. Either one of them was terrible.
Yeah.
And the lights come on, and we're sitting in like a U-shaped thing, and I'm looking across at Francois, and I think Greg Hughes is next to me, and Pete and Mike are in there, and Bob and Bernard are in there, and a bunch of French guys. And Sylvain, who was the marketing director, came from Yo Play. He's like going, well, what do you guys think? And there's just literally like crickets. No one's saying a thing. And finally, Greg Hughes breaks the ice by saying, well, you better hope your stuff sells through, because if it doesn't, now you are taking it back. And everybody in the room just busted out laughing, except for the French people. Like, it was hilarious. Even Francois, who's French Canadian, he has a sense of humor. He laughed.
Oh, that's amazing. So you end up leaving that group. You're number 23 when you get to Skullcandy. How many people are at Skullcandy when you leave 6 years later?
Shoot. I honestly don't know.
Ballpark, just guess.
Yeah, hundreds, And we had a big team in Asia and a big team here and some distributors where we were and whatnot. So we had a big team, great sales team, and it was actually a fun product. Like, I really enjoyed kind of learning these new categories. So there was a couple guys that were working on consumer electronics. So they were the Radio Shack and Best Buys and all the other chains that went out of business. They were working on that. And my job was the specialty channel. So I worked with all the lifestyle, like the mall stores, Zoomies and Journeys, and Foot Locker to a degree. We did some athletic stuff with some of the foot stores. And it's funny because I have a mallophobia. So here I am running the mall stores and have to go into malls, but I hate going into malls. And so I did that. Then I had to figure out the college bookstore channel. And I was convinced that we could go direct in the college bookstore market and not have to use a college bookstore distribution group. And then I quickly learned that that was not going to work. And I had to get these distributors. So we hired Douglas Stewart out of Madison, Wisconsin, a great group of people, wonderful people that really know that college bookstore market. And then I had to figure out the airport channel because you sell a lot of headphones in airports, and that was a really fun channel to understand. I ran the 5 boroughs of consumer electronics stores in the greater New York City area. So I was going to New York about every 6 weeks. And I really enjoyed that, with the exception of the fact that a lot of the people in the consumer electronics space are not very trustworthy. There's not a lot of integrity. They will look you right in the eye and tell you one thing, even though that's not true. Like, hey, and 6 weeks later, you find more products showing up in South America. You're like, wait, you said you weren't diverting that product. That's the one thing about the consumer electronics space, was just the lack of integrity.
Gray market nightmare?
Not so much gray marketing, just people not being truthful and upfront, and not a lot of integrity. And both coworkers that came from consumer electronics space that I had to work with, and dealers that I had to work with. I'm just like, wow, it is rampant to be not very truthful in this space. And so I didn't like really that part of the business, but I did enjoy parts of it. And I really enjoyed the team I worked with. And, I had a really good crew of people at Skullcandy that I worked with, Tina and Jeff Chu, and a great sales crew. So yeah, we had an awesome group of people. And I feel like that magic that I had at K2, it didn't last forever, but I had a lot of years that were really just the best years of my life. I had those same kind of magical years at Skullcandy, and I had those same kind of magical years at Traeger, where everything was clicking. We were growing, we were developing new product and launching it, and we were beating out our competition, and we were doing it in a way that was different than our competition was doing it. And our dealers really appreciated it, and we made some dealers that are still friends for life.
Well, I think all the brands that you're talking about, product is always king with all of them. But with product, you have to have great marketing, and that can come, it can be hired, that can be sourced out. But you also have to have a great sales strategy. You figured it out at K2, the whole, I'm going to own the specialty retailer. I'm going to own the guy in the store. When someone walks into that retailer to buy something, even if they're coming in for a Burton, there's a good chance they're going to walk out with a K2 because I've invested in that guy and he's going to sell my product. Well, you take that to these other brands and you're able to replicate that. When you do that and you get to Skullcandy, and once you're able to learn all those channels along with what you know about buying the retailer, it's like you guys are in position to just own a category that no one's really played with that much. You know, there was Bose that was cool, but there was nothing really in the headphone market that spoke to the action sports consumer. And that's what you guys kind of owned and founded yourselves on, it seemed like.
Yeah, my hat's off to Rick Alden for being the visionary of that. When Skullcandy really started taking off was when Steve Jobs developed the iPod, right? So like now you've got all these people that want access to music and they need earbuds and they don't want their dad's Sony or, Bose earbuds. And they also don't want to spend that much money. And, for our value for the quality that we offered was really good. Like our $29 earbuds were just insane at the time. And our $49 headphones. The hard part was we didn't have brand permission to go into those more expensive price points. So we were crushing it for years. And when Beats came out, I still remember sitting at our executive table, like on a Monday morning meeting that we would do every week with the leaders of the business at Skullcandy. We were talking about Beats. And somebody in our group said, who's going to buy a $250 pair of Beats headphones? And they were literally poo-pooing it. And I'm like, man, don't put your noses in the air. We got to be humble. We got to be hungry. And apparently anyone with a household income of $500 is buying a pair of Beats for $250. So Big Mike, who was our sneaker freaker, still an amazing human and rep and sales guy in that space and works with the Kith and the Supremes all over the place. So he was our Skullcandy sneaker freaker guy. And my daughter, ironically enough, works for his wife in Hollywood. And so Big Mike is in Brooklyn. He knows all the cool, Dave's Meat Locker. He knows all the coolest sneaker freaker shops. We're walking to one of his stores in Manhattan and he said, Luke, you don't understand. I'm going to do a terrible impression of him, but he's like with his Brooklyn accent. Luke, you don't understand. We don't have cars out here in the East. We all take the subway. That's why everybody looks down at your shoes. Your shoes are your car. That's why you got to have good shoes. You should see my shoe collection. And, being a sneaker freaker guy, he's got racks and racks and racks of the baddest shoes ever.
Yep.
And he goes, your shoes is your car and your headphones is your car stereo. And I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense, right? In LA, everybody has to have a car. But in New York, nobody has a car. And so your headphones are so critical to the style of it. And so we had these $50 and $70 and $100 headphones. But when we tried to go into the $180 and $200 and $250 headphones, we just didn't have the brand permission. The consumer did not think the Skullcandy brand was a really high quality brand that you would spend that much money on a pair of headphones, unfortunately. And I know they've evolved over the years since then, but at that time, we launched some cool product and it just didn't sell through. And it was awesome product, looked cool. We had a good marketing plan, but the consumer just would not. We just didn't have the brand permission to go into those higher price points.
It's like that whole Rossy rental board mentality of like, hey, you can't sell the higher end if you're making rubber bumpered rental snowboards.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and I'm going to start with Elan Skis. I've been skiing on Elan, the Ripstick and the Playmaker, for the past 3 seasons. And when I first started doing ads for Elan, I would rave about the quality of the skis because you really can see a difference in the fit and finish from an Elan compared to every other ski on the wall. I'd always attribute that to Elan having the best factory in skiing, their heritage in building spare no-expense yachts, and having real skiers build the skis in the Slovenian Alps. That combination has created lively, playful skis that remain rock solid underfoot at high speeds and have really made me feel like I'm a better skier. And while it's not ski season, when it is, if you demo skis before you buy them, please support me in what I do and try an Elan, and you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. If you buy skis without the test drive, trust me, and head on over to elanskis.com to see all the choices, and you're going to have more fun on the mountain than you ever have before next season. Next up, it's Best Day Brewing. And while I love a cold beer, I don't always need the alcohol. And that's where Best Day comes into play. It's brewed with people like you and me in mind. The skiers, the snowboarders, the skaters, the bikers, the runners, the gym rats, the bladers, the surfers. Anyone who loves parking lot beers, tailgate beers, studio beers, workshop beers, you get the idea. Best Day is the best way to celebrate your best days and not to have to worry about the drive home or a lot of calories or anything else for that matter. While I'm not saying don't drink alcohol, there's a time and a place for everything. When it's doing time, I like to drink Best Day straight up. But when it's drinking time, I like to mix in a best day between every alcoholic drink to keep me sharp and in control. It's a cheat code for all-night fun. To find out more about the Best Day flavors and buy some, head on over to bestdaybrewing.com or pick some up over on Amazon. My final sponsor is the brand that has created the most incredible pint glass in the history of the world. I'm talking about Stanley. Yes, that brand that makes your grandfather's favorite green coffee mug. It's also the brand that's front and center in the life and times of pop icon Olivia Rodrigo, and a brand that I'm proud to say has been supporting the outdoors and the sports we love since before the other copycat brands existed. Stanley invented the category of keeping things hot and cold in 1913, and while their quenchers have taken over the world by storm, I personally swear by their adventure stacking pint beer glasses, and have used them almost every day for the past 7 years. No joke. I also love all their choices of food jars and storage items for parking lot fare at the mountain or during my 1 day a year at Wild Waves, which is coming up. To see all the products from Stanley, the brand that everyone's talking about these days, but I've been talking about for over 7 years, head on over to stanley1913.com and go shopping. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. The company, though, eventually goes public, and you're there when it goes public, and the stock comes out. I think it's like $20 a share. Did you get a lot of stock options, and did you sell before the stock crashed?
I did get some stock options. I wouldn't say I got a lot. You know, you look at people that got hired like the year before we went public, and there's people there that got way more than I did. But I got a good chunk, and I was smart enough to sell when I could sell. So I turned that into some money. But I know people that hung on to it until it got below their strike price, and they were just like upside down. And they were hoping it would turn around, and then it never did. So there was a lot of people that walked away from that without anything, which was unfortunate.
Yeah, that does suck. Eventually, you go on to running the whole Canadian business from Park City. And I don't really need to talk about the Canadian business at Skullcandy because your next job, it looks like you try to do something with some meaning. And we're not going to talk about meaning at all. What I will say is that you do a year with Bare Bones Living, and it's a company that makes like yurt-like structures. And your time there is defined by a product display that you had set up in a secret backcountry location. And how did that end up for you?
Well, I really did enjoy my time up in Canada. And I will say one thing about that with Skullcandy was I'd go to work on Monday here in Park City, fly to Seattle Monday night, and my sister and brother-in-law stay at their apartment right above Pike Street Market on Monday night, have dinner with them. Then Tuesday morning, take the train from Seattle to Vancouver, which was awesome because you could sit in the coffee car facing the ocean, and about 70% of the train ride you're along the coast. And then I'd get off the train and walk to my hotel and go to the office, and I built out a team there, and I really enjoyed it. I love working with Canadians. They're the coolest people. And my best compliment during that time was when people would ask me what part of Canada I was from. I'm like, yes.
Oh, that means you're so nice.
Awesome. So that was my Canada time, which I forgot now. What was the question again?
So you do the Bare Bones Living thing. They make yurt-like structures. You set one up somewhere where you weren't supposed to set it up, and something happened.
Yeah, so it was a for-profit company that did a lot of humanitarian work, and these tents you could use for hunting, or you could also use them for third world countries, like for shelters and birthing units and everything like that. So it was a heavy-duty tent, but it wasn't meant to be up in big snow. My nephew Ben and I found a spot up behind my house, and I guess I probably shouldn't say. So we built out this platform, and I wanted it to be hidden halfway up where I go ski touring behind my house. And I wanted it to be hidden from any like other houses or anything like that. But I wanted it to be south facing so I could put solar panels up and have power. And so I built a shelter with this thing that slept 2 and partied 12. And it had a bunk beds in it. It had a small stove, like a hunting stove in it with a kitchen. It had 3 lights. You'd come in, turn on the lights. They all ran off the solar power. It had a bar. It had a stereo. And I really only used it in the wintertime. But I got 5 seasons out of it before a trail got put in right below it, and the Utah Open Space people found it. They came in and left a note. I found out from my buddy, hey, I think somebody's looking for you up at your place. They might have found it. So I ran up there. I didn't see a note. Then I heard something else again from another guy, and I ran up there the next day, and there was a note in there. So I called the girl, and she was not cool about it. And I said, well, I did put this up before you guys changed this land. The land was owned by the Sorensen family. And then the Sorensen family traded it out with Utah Open Space for some other land and some cash and whatnot to protect this land. And so I tried to get her to let me keep it up there as a open space that others could use as well. And she said, no, you have 2 weeks to get it out. And I think I was out of town 10 of those 2 weeks. I mean, it took me 100 trips to carry this stuff up there.
Huh.
But I luckily had my buddy Gorio in there, my two neighbors, Tim and Mike, that came up with me and helped me carry load after load after load up and down the mountain with the wheelbarrow. But, I was doing loads up at like 4 a.m. before work with like a stove on my backpack and then dropping it off and then coming back down and then going to work and then going back up. And then the weekends, doing some more loads up there. But you had to carry the loads up in the dark early in the morning so you didn't run into anybody. So yeah, it was a cool secret little place. A friend of mine's wife worked for the Utah Open Space, and when they were talking about my shelter, they had a statewide meeting with all the things, and they actually did a slideshow of my shelter because they said it was the best one that they've seen of secret shelters that are unapproved and illegal secret shelters. And so they didn't charge me or fine me because they didn't want to make a big deal out of it. If they made a big deal out of it, it might inspire others to think about, well, where could I put one up, And so they gave me 2 weeks to get it all out of there. I got it out of there, and then I brought it all home. And I either got the stuff on Proform or, got people to donate stuff to me that I knew from other industry brands. And so the whole setup was probably like a $10,000 camp. But I probably only had about $2,000 into it. So I think I sold it to a Utah prepper family for the whole kit, the tent, the cots, the sleeping bags. I sold the whole thing for $2,500. And the guy paid cash because it was one of those fundamentalist people that don't believe in credit cards or phones.
All right. So that is bare bones living. And the biggest rocket ship that you've been on in your career is Traeger. And I would think that happens because you worked with Jeremy Andrews at Skullcandy. And he's probably like, hey, man, I think we can recreate the snowboard brand and sales building model with this category like we did at Skullcandy. And I want you to lead the charge. That's my assumption. But is that how it happens?
Well, so when I joined Skullcandy, Rick was the one that recruited me. He was the CEO, and he said, you're going to report to Jeremy. And Jeremy, I think he'd had a job before that, but he was pretty young in his career. And I'm like, oh, geez, I'm going to have to report to a guy that doesn't know very much. And so he was my boss. And then he ultimately the CEO at Skullcandy before. And then I think my last year and a half there, he wasn't there. He had gotten let go there. And then at Traeger, he didn't hire me there either. Denny Bruce hired me at Traeger. And Denny is who
guy.
I hired out of college for K2 as my Mid-Atlantic rep. And then I hired him at Skullcandy as my East Coast sales manager. And then Denny got hired by Jeremy first. And I still was committed to some stuff at Bare Bones. And actually, at the time when they first got involved with Traeger, I did not want to have anything to do with it because there was the original owner was still involved in it, and he was just a nightmare. So I had no interest in doing it. But as soon as that guy got bought out, I was bugging Denny, like, Denny, when are you going to hire me? Come on, hire me, Denny. Let's do this. And so I was excited to join early in 2014.
And with Traeger, is it pretty much just going back to the playbook that's worked over and over? Like, get a cool team of good reps, fire them up on the product, build real relationships with the dealers, and make the products easy to buy and easy to sell? And why veer off the path if it's been working everywhere you've been?
Yeah, so there was so many things to fix at Traeger, I can't tell you. So it was a family-run business where they hired a bunch of family members to do different jobs within the company and or neighbors or, friends of friends. They weren't really hiring talented people I shouldn't say they weren't talented. They just weren't experienced at the job that they had. Doesn't mean they weren't good people. So we really had to turn things around one day at a time, and we couldn't do it overnight. A third of Traeger's business was direct to consumer. A third of it was at Costco, and a third of it was, as the old owner used to say, the whiny retailers. Dealers hated us, and they were telling us they loved the product. They used the product, but they were telling us that they hate the brand because of the go-to-market strategy, because they put the same product in Costco that the local A store might have down the street. And the A store is $200 more because Costco runs on that, 10-point margin. That's their plan. And so you have to put different product in Costco. So it took us a while to kind of fix the Costco plan. We had 7 distributors domestically here in the United States that we had to kind of phase out. And the last 2 were the best ones that we had, Great Western and Crawford. They were awesome partners, but we knew we needed to go direct, and it was financially, that was the way to go. And plus we wanted more direct control of our business with our retail partners. So we bought those 2 guys out, the last 2 guys out. And then over that time, again, Denny, myself, none of us really knew a lot about the hardware space or how the buying groups work in this particular area, but we had worked with buying groups before in the ski and snowboard world. And so we had farm and ranch to figure out. We had just to understand the strategy of go-to-market strategy. 85% of grills are sold through retailers, not online. It's only 15% total are sold online. So you really had to understand, like, how do we get into these showrooms? We had over 100 home accounts, meaning like somebody that called up Traeger and said, hey, I want to be a dealer, but they weren't a dealer. They were just somebody that wanted to get a deal for them and their dad or whatever. And then they were going to sell a few to their buddies. And then they became dealers in their neighborhood and they were on the dealer locator. So you can imagine the customer experience there. They're not open all the time. One lady would show up with her robe half undone when she'd answer the door. So I had to personally, with a lot of empathy, call up a lot of those guys and let them go. And these guys were making 5 or 10 grand a year, nice little vacation fund on the side of their normal job. So it was a little side hustle. And they loved the product. So they were butthurt like you wouldn't imagine. And a couple of them really like angry, but most of them I could have a logical conversation with. Like, John Deere doesn't sell tractors out of people's garages. They have distribution. Oakley Sunglasses doesn't sell sunglasses out of somebody's front door. Like you got to go to a retail location. So at some point we want to be next to Weber and Big Green Egg and all the other brands that are out there so that consumers can find us where they're looking to shop for grills. And then it's our job to make those shops want to sell our grills and recommend our grills, which is what my job was.
There's a ton of differences between Traeger and the other grills, the way you approach the market, especially with the sales strategy. But when you think about the grill category, I mean, there's been like one kind of marketing, it seems like, for 50, 60 years, where they just target the old man who's going to be grilling all the time. And you guys decided to make a shift and you targeted people that make passions a lifestyle. Can you describe how that kind of mentality was disruptive?
Yeah, so there's a barbecue trade show in the US called HPBA, Hearth Patio Barbecue Association. And it should be the biggest barbecue trade show in the world, but it's run by a bunch of old timers that work in the hearth space. And hearth is those wood-fired, pellet stoves and whatnot. So they had no clue of the barbecue space, but they had this trade show. So barbecue brands went there. Our first couple years we went there before we pulled out of the show because it was a terrible show. You'd see like 30 plus gas grill brands, and they all had the same marketing with a picture of like some 50-plus-year-old dude and his wife standing over the grill with a spatula and getting ready to flip something, a burger or whatever, or steak. And you could just look around the whole trade show and it was all the same thing with all the same people selling the product. And we purposely built a sales team that was not from the hardware space and not from the barbecue space. And I hired a bunch of ex-guys I worked with at both Skullcandy and K2. So we built a team of people that, and like the ski and snowboard sales reps, they work their asses off. Like they work hard. It takes a lot of work to do all the demos and the clinics and work the sales and events and show up and do the trainings. And no one was really doing that in the space that we were at. We'd go into stores and they're like, "Guy, you guys have been here twice in the last 3 months. I haven't seen my Weber rep in a year." And so we really were kind of changing the game and upping the ante for everybody. And when you think about no matter what job I've had, the easier we are to do business with our sales team, with our distributors, that's our first line of customers. We got to win them over. The easier we are to deal with our reps, and then the easier we are to deal with our dealers and do business with, then the more business we're going to get. So that's been my mantra all the time is like, what can we take off of their plate to make it easier to do business? And what can we do to make sure it gets done? Because if you just wait for somebody else to do all the work, it may not ever get done. And so that was kind of our mentality of like that. And for many years, I'd say first 6 or 7 of the years I was at Traeger, we were the not only the favorite barbecue brand of all the retailers we were in, we were their favorite brand of any category they worked with. We'd hear that all the time at hardware stores that deal with all kinds of different categories and reps and sales teams. And it was a very rewarding thing. I mean, I can't tell you how many Vendor of the Year awards we won from Ace and True Value and all these different type of retailers, Shields, etc.
Do you guys go from almost the laughing stock of these trade shows to like, holy shit, I can't believe these guys have done it and won everybody over?
So trade shows are where we really could take the action sports lifestyle of the trade shows to the hardware space where no one else knew, had seen that. And so we dressed up in costumes and did all kinds of stuff to stand out and make our brand fun, because the more fun you are, at a trade show event, these dealers have to go into all these boring booths all day long anyway. Like, let's have some fun. So we absolutely brought that same playbook that, I wouldn't say I invented it, but it's an easy playbook to bring of just doing fun things at trade shows. And then really making sure like we greet everyone that would come into our booth with a smile and a high five, no matter even if they have a Weber tag on there, whatever. When we would serve food at these events and demos outside at the trade shows, we would serve food to all of our competition too. Like, and a lot of the vendor brands other brands would say, no, you're not a buyer. Don't come into our booth. And we're like, no, everyone. I don't care if you work at the convention center and you're serving coffee and you want to come over and get some food from us. We're going to take care of you. So that was kind of our mantra, and it was fun to be the fun brand that was happy and nice to everybody instead of the grumpy brand that, is looking at your badge to see if you're even worth talking to.
Well, another thing that you brought out of the playbook for Traeger was creating a crazy event with a crazy name. What was Traeger Man Week all about?
Well, I only did it once because it kicked my ass. I brought a bunch of dealers to Salt Lake City. We toured the office and did a shop class there of cooking. And then we all drove out to the Green River. And I'd already went out a couple days earlier with my nephew, Ben, and then another guy, Tim Parker. And we set up a ton of tents that I borrowed from Bare Bones. So we had a whole camp set up by the Green River. I had rented rafts and we basically got there. And the first night we got there, we're all partying. And I brought all this food. We planned out the menu. And granted, this is early in my time at Traeger, so we might not have been as good at planning out the menu. And we ate 3 days worth of food the first night. And I panicked. And luckily, one of the guys that came out from Salt Lake City, their Ace store owns a grocery store next door to it. And he had one of his buddies from the grocery store just load up. We gave him a huge list from Salt Lake City and just bring out multiple coolers. And then we were back in business with food. And then we all rafted the next day. Some guys had fishing poles, a lot of beers. We kicked off the float like I do with all my floats is with mimosas. So we're popping bottles of champagne and orange juice and doing some mimosas on the river before we leave. And then we just partied like rock stars every night. And the reason it was Traeger Man Week was because, well, 90% of my shop employees with Traeger were men. And I didn't want to kind of mix women into this particular scenario just because I didn't want the liability of it. And it turned out to be a good thing. But there were definitely a few insiders inside Traeger that were not happy. Well, one in particular that worked with me that was a girl, and she would not help at all on any of the stuff we were doing. She's like, nope, I'm not doing it. This is sexist, what you're doing. I'm like, oh, all right. But it was an awesome, fun, one and done event. It kicked my ass.
The coolest part of the brand to me was not only getting free girls, because I got some of those, but it was that you guys became part of pop culture for a while. I mean, you still are when football season rolls around. But between athletes and events, what were the highlights or once-in-a-lifetime experiences that you had because of Traeger?
Oh, God. So you asked about like marketing, and there's the 50-year-old guys at HPBA. And we definitely targeted that 35-year-old, like that, I got a couple of young kids. I'm buying my first house. I need a grill. So we targeted a younger customer. And what's interesting, I use this story quite a bit because back in the mid 90s, when I was at K2 Skis was targeting the 45-year-old doctor lawyer. And like many of the ski brands over the years, they had kind of peaks and valleys in terms of when the brand was hot. And that 45-year-old doctor lawyer target thing was one of the valleys, right? They just were sucking ass. And on the snowboard side, we had the Lincoln Continental. We were driving a lot of energy and doing a lot of fun stuff, which is the whole snowboard industry was doing. Like we were just all doing crazy stuff and it was working and it was making our brand relevant. But the skis were getting pretty conservative. And then when the skis in the late 90s started to really get back to the roots of youth skiing and targeting that younger skier, they did it in a way that emulated a lot of what we did on the snowboard side, which was awesome. And they had a great blueprint to follow. And that's the direction the whole ski industry was going anyway, not like K2 was the only ones thinking that way. And then you can do that in a way without alienating that 40 or 50-year-old customer that wants to be associated with cool brands too. And so even though K2 Skis was targeting that younger 20-something-year-old skier, they were selling a shit ton more skis now to the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, because there's a lot of people like me that are older that want to still be hip and associated with hip products and hip brands. And so on the grill side, all these brands are so conservative. I always say you got to put 1 foot over the line, not two. And how you're being disruptive and putting that 1 foot over the line, because if you don't get any complaints, you aren't being disruptive. And if you get too many complaints, then you're probably putting 2 feet over the line. So you got to find that balance of getting some complaints and doing some fun stuff. And when Yalmar and came into Traeger as the VP of the brand, that was my time with him. Spending with him was like, you got to make sure that you continue to be disruptive. Like if you do a photo shoot, you're going to run an ad or a picture, an image, and you can take out the Traeger logo and put a Weber logo in there and no one's going to know the difference, then it's not the right image. Like you have to be edgy and out there, and you got to make sure you're getting some complaints, because if you're not getting any complaints, and that includes from retailers too. And I've had retailers, where we say this some bitch can grill, I guarantee it. And they're like, oh, we can't put anything in our store that has cuss words on it because we're in this religious zone. But I love what you guys are doing. Keep doing it. And they just wouldn't carry that particular product because it said this some bitch.
Yeah, totally. So it seems like you've got this dream job going with Traeger. We didn't talk about once-in-a-lifetime experiences, but I'm sure you're going to throw it into this next answer of your question. But why would you leave?
Oh, God. What were my once in a lifetime? Back to the original question. I mean, I spent most of my time with our retail partners and our sales team and did a lot of cool trips with those guys, but I didn't necessarily get to do any amazing things like drink scotch with John Krakauer and a rock crack like I did when I was at K2.
So why would you leave the dream job that was Traeger?
Well, trying to be politically correct here. Like K2 or Skullcandy, things change over time and new people come in and new leadership and direction comes in, and we went public. And after we went public, I met with Jeremy about taking a step back and letting John O'Connor take over, because I wanted to travel more and I really wanted to do this 3-week vacation. So I did my 3-week vacation, and while I was gone and I had stepped back from my role, still working at Traeger, while I was in France, John called me and said, hey, I actually took another job. I'm not going to be able to take over your old job. I'm like, oh shit, that means I got to come back. And when I come back, I'm going to have to take over my old job. So I came back and stepped back into my old job. But again, with new leadership there that I had to report to. And it was just somebody who wanted to take the brand in a different direction. And I really wish Traeger the best, but it was time for me to move on.
Fair enough. Well, you didn't get rich enough to retire and spend your life adventuring, so you're going to re-enter the workforce at some point, it sounds like. And if you're building a brand, you can email me and I'll connect you with Luke, because based on his track record, he can make your brand a lot better than it is right now. But that's not what we're here to talk about at the end of this podcast. We're here for inappropriate questions. And I didn't have much time to pull these last 3 questions together because this is a part 2. But I did get someone that you know very well, your old team manager at K2. He was a designer as well, a West Seattleite. He's the owner of Manus Optics. I'm talking about Dave Billinghurst. And are you ready for question number 1 from Dave?
Yes.
You've had a history of running into sharp objects while on snow. Tell us about the time you were speared with a ski pole and a tree limb.
Aha. Well, I have been speared. I've speared myself with my crampon. I have ran into a tree. So I got my laser eye surgery, I want to say 12 years ago. But before that, I ran into a lot of stuff, both mountain biking and snowboarding. Because I don't like to wear contacts and I don't like wearing glasses like under my goggles. So I would just kind of go with this fuzzy, feeling. And once I got the LASIK eye surgery, I got to tell you, that changed everything, because I can ride without contacts or glasses and I really can see the shadows in the limbs. But we were doing a Rossignol event at the canyons with a bunch of dealers in town, and I was taking dealers up to 99.90 and then hiking Square Top and then doing the super rad extreme run and riding across this frozen lake and then back into the ski area. And so I was on my 3rd run. I'd already done 2 of them with dealers, and I grabbed another group of dealers. Who wants to go? I'm ready. Let's go. Grabbed another group of dealers, and we're going down in the bottom of Tombstone on our way to the chair. The run got pretty narrow because it was spring and it was melting out. There was still some snow, but it had gotten pretty narrow. I'm looking at this lady traversing across it, and I'm on that very edge of the snow, and it drops off into no snow. And I'm like, is she going to turn? Is she going to turn? And all of a sudden I realize, oh shit, I'm going pretty fast. So I'm still in control, but now the next thing I know, I'm like in the air off the snow and I'm going through the woods and I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to hit that tree. I better hit the brakes. And so I go to the hillside edge on the dirt and I hit this stump and it goes up my left butt cheek and I get a stick up my ass. I didn't realize at the time. I just thought it was a stinger. And I stand up and my buddy Chip Bowen was like, real monotone buddy, friend of mine, awesome, great sense of humor. He's like, Luke, you got a stick up your ass. Don't move. And I'm like, what? And I reach around and I try to Rambo the thing like, oh. He goes, no, don't pull it out. And I didn't know that at the time. You're not supposed to pull those sticks out like they do in the movies. So then I'm like, oh shit, now I am done for sure. At first I was still thinking it was a stinger and I might be able to ride out of it and keep going, but I wasn't quite sure yet. I was standing up and realizing, so I got this stick. So then the patroller's got to come and take me out, and it takes them a while to get me in the toboggan and up on the snow again and then down to the ambulance. The ambulance guy's reading my vitals and he's calling down to the University of Utah hospital. And I'm like, I need morphine. Because I've had a lot of injuries, so I know I need morphine. I'm like, I need morphine right now. And he's like, just a sec. And he's like talking on the radio again. I have a stick up my ass. I need morphine. And these guys laugh and he's like, hey, okay, just a sec. Just give me 2 seconds. Let me just get this called in. I'll get you some morphine. And then he starts talking again, stick up my ass. And so anyway, he's laughing and they get me all set up. When I come into the University of Utah hospital, I'm on my stomach in my snowboard boots and my pants and everything. And now the morphine's kicking in, but the shock is wearing off. And I'm realizing I'm in some serious pain. And these guys are all looking at me like in shock, like, what's going on? This guy's got a stick up his ass. So I said, I go, what are you guys looking at? Nobody's ever seen anybody with a stick up their ass? So they're laughing. And I go, you can cut my pants off, but you cannot cut my boots off. You got to unlace those. And snowboard boots, they got an outer lace, a lower lace, an inner boot lace. Like, it's like a lot of laces to get those boots off. So finally they get them off. And I'd have 3 surgeries to get the wood out. The second surgery, they pulled out a 4-inch piece of wood. And so the doctor that worked on me was a doctor that had spent time in Afghanistan. And they used the same treatment that they do on shrapnel, where they used to just go in once, clean it up and close it up and you're done. But the infection rates were too high. So they realized if they go in, clean it out, and then just tape it up, but don't stitch it up, and then go in 2 days later, clean it out one more time, make sure they got everything, clean it out. And then they do it a third time on day 6, I think it is. So every other day they do a surgery. So they did the 3 surgeries. And I didn't know about the piece of wood. And so when I went back to my follow-up thing, he told me the story and he said, have you ever seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail? And I said, yeah, like about 1,000 times. And he's like, when I pulled that piece of wood out, we thought it was a piece of your pelvis. We thought, did we take x-rays on this guy? And they're like, I don't think we did take x-rays. He goes, I think he's got a broken pelvis. And he pulls it out. He thinks it's bone. And then they pull out this stick and it's still got a piece of Gore-Tex around the outside of it. I think I still have that stick somewhere in a plastic bag. He goes, I held it up and everybody looked at it and went, whoa, like how'd we miss that the first time?
Oh man, that is crazy. That is a great inappropriate question. We're going to jump into question number 2.
Tell us how in the late 80s wearing bike shorts and eyeliner helped your snowboard career.
Well, so in the 80s when I was bartending at the Vogue in downtown Seattle on First Avenue, I didn't have a car, so I commuted by bike, and I would ride my bike down to work, and I'd either start at 8 p.m. or 10 p.m. and get off at 2 or 3 in the morning. I would wear bike shorts a lot of times, and I did have a phase in the mid 80s, late 80s, where I wore some eyeliner and might have had my long hair in a pony and one of those pineapple ponytails on top of my head. And, it was a very mixed club, if you know what I'm saying, with the type of clientele there. So you had to keep moving, had to keep shaking. But I got to say, I had a really good time in the 80s. Lost a few brain cells, but had a good time.
All right. Well, let's jump into your final inappropriate question.
Luke, you're the king of expense reports. How many sock buyers is okay to include on a dinner expense?
It's funny. We'd go out to dinner with a dealer and we're like, okay, this was a big dinner. Like, we need some names here, boys. Like, who else is attending this dinner? And we'd write down names. And I remember Lionel Ford was our CFO at K2. And I had the boys from D&B Snowboard Shop in Aspen, who I had taken out to a big sushi dinner there. And I had them in town for one of those Rainier climbs. And so while they were touring the office, Lionel Ford goes, "Oh, are the D&B guys here?" And I didn't know he really wanted to go up and kind of question about one of my expense reports. But he said, "Were there really 30 people at this dinner? Do you have a staff that big? Did Luke take out 30 people at this dinner?" And he's like, "Oh, yes, of course he did, Lionel." And so he backed up my story, luckily.
Oh, that's amazing. So that is Inappropriate Questions, and that's the podcast. And I never do a part 2 on business episodes. I don't think I've ever done one. But while I've had some people on the podcast who've had great careers, and those careers are intertwined with a ton of ski and snowboard history, your career rivals the best of them. But what sets you apart from everybody else is the passion that you bring to the table and the ability to inspire and engage through your storytelling. And the fact that you were in the Army. I mean, who would have thought that a leader in the counterculture snowboard movement would be an Army guy? But it is you. You get out there and get after it more than almost anybody I've talked to on the podcast, whether they're a pro or not. It's like you're always doing something and you're still doing it. And you're like 60 plus years old. That's a guess. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it's a really cool story. And I thank you for telling it. And I thank you for your time.
Mike, you're the man, brother. I look forward to meeting you in person, and let's spend some time together soon. Next time you're in Park City, let me know.
So that was time with Luke Edgar, and what a career he's had. And he's based everything off a successful playbook, one that I felt we continued to use at K2 long after Luke left. It was all about building meaningful relationships with everyone, creating cool environments to foster the development of those relationships, and then giving everyone cool shit to remember those memorable experiences. When done right, all of that translated into incremental business in the future for the brands that I work for, and I'm sure that happened with Luke as well, because he's the mastermind behind that theory. If you're a brand that has the budgets to make things like this happen, winning isn't that hard if you have the right people behind it, and it can actually be fun. I mean, look at Luke. He's made a career out of it, and he's had more fun than anyone almost that I've had on the podcast. That's the show. I want to thank you for listening and remind you to tell a friend to go listen to Luke's podcast. If you like Luke, I bet your friends are too, and you know his stories are amazing, so please do that. And please, please, please support my incredible sponsors. I only work with the best brands, and they are Elon Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Outdoor Research, Stanley, Best Day Brewing, and Liquid Force. Have a great week, everyone.